One of the rabbis, contemporary rabbis, who has the greatest impact on me these days is a rabbi based in Chicago named B'nai Lappi. Rabbi B'nai Lappi runs an incredible organization called Svara. And she gave a TED Talk a few years ago that she calls the Crash Talk. Some of you have heard me talk about this before. In it, Rabbi Lappi says that every single one of us, and not just us, every institution, every community, every nation, lives with a story. A set of things that we know to be true about ourselves as an individual or as a group. And that story, which plays in the background of our minds, lives in our hearts and souls, gives us purpose and meaning and an ability to face each day. Rabbi Lappi says it is inevitable in the life of every individual, of every institution and every community, every nation, that at some point that story goes crash. At some point, that story stops working. The things that you knew about yourself to be true, the things that you knew would never change, the things that you felt you could hold on to, all of a sudden change, unexpectedly sometimes. And we need, when we face a moment of crash, she says, to make a decision about how we will respond. There are 3 responses possible to a crash. The first response, Rabbi Lappi says, is denial. Is pretending that the story still works, despite the fact that circumstances have so clearly changed. Continuing to do the same thing today as you did yesterday, even though today is an entirely new and different day. Has anyone ever tried that strategy? A few people are smiling, a few people are nodding. Denial ain't just a river in Egypt, we have all lived it. Second possibility, she says, is furious anger. My story stopped working. The thing I knew to be true yesterday no longer makes sense today, in which case everything is that way. Nothing is reliable. Nothing is worth anything. Nothing is worth investing in. And giving over to despair and to nihilism and to contempt for self and for the world around us. We all, if we're honest, have found ourselves in that place too. When faced with a crash, we have faced it with a sense that the whole world doesn't make sense, will never make sense again, and why even bother? We know about denial, and we know about anger. But what Rabbi Lappi says our future depends on is our capacity when we experience a crash to eventually embrace a third option. And the third option, of course, is evolution. It's to take the broken pieces of the old story and to put them back together into a new story that can propel us forward. Maybe more beautiful than before, maybe not. It's not always the case that what comes after a crash is better than what came before the crash. There are missing pieces that can't ever be fit back into the puzzle. But we can write a new story, and that new story can give us a way to keep walking forward in the world. In 1963, a young rabbi named Harold Kushner and his wife had a very wanted child. His name was Aaron, and at age 3, the day after his sister was born, he was diagnosed with a terminal, incurable progressive illness called progeria. Many of us know it as the rapid aging disease. Aaron died 3 days after his 14th birthday in 1977. Rabbi Kushner at that time was serving as the rabbi of Temple Israel of Natick, where he served 26 years in total on the pulpit. And he says in the experience of raising and then losing Aaron. The story that had sent him initially to rabbinical school came crashing down. It was a conventional story of religion, a conventional theology, that if you do good things, you earn God's blessings, and if you step out of line, God may swat you back into line. It was a conventional theology held by billions of people around the world that everything ultimately happens for a reason, that God's in charge, and our job is to follow the path that God points and not ask too many questions about it, because it's all in the end for our own good. After raising a son, after losing a son, after experiencing not just his own personal tragedy, but experiencing, as all rabbis do, tragedy after tragedy in the lives of many good people who do not deserve the pain that's visited on them, Rabbi Kushner set about writing a book. Many of you have read. How many of you have read When Bad Things Happen to Good People? Look across this room. I've been told that a best-selling Jewish book written by a rabbi might, what is it, Ellie, 10,000 copies? There we go. That's a real winner. Sold 4 million copies of this book in its initial printing. Sat at the top of the New York Times bestseller list for months and months and months on end, because it contained a message that all of us, not just Jews, but all of us need to hear. A sort of Copernican revolution in theology that says that God, who we've always been told is in charge of everything, able to do anything, and just sometimes chooses this one to get a tumor and this one to get a car accident, isn't actually the God who's ever been up there at all. In fact, God operates entirely differently, Rabbi Kushner says. God does not bring the cancer or the accident. God is not, as Elijah learned, in the earthquake or in the fire. God is in the wellspring of love and courage, of strength and empathy, of resilience and grace that allows us to face all of those things and write for ourselves new stories. It's not that God isn't powerful, it's just powerful in a different way. Powerful not in controlling what happens to us, but extraordinarily powerful in blessing us with how we are to respond to it. Rabbi Kushner took a story that went crash in one of the most awful ways that anyone could imagine. And he put back together the pieces. He wrote a new story, and he invited millions and millions of others to find comfort in that story. That's extraordinary. Now, I want to be very, very clear, and he was clear in interviews and in writings. It's not that the blessings that came out of Aaron's death made Aaron's death okay. The ends do not justify the means. He said many times, I would rather be an obscure pulpit rabbi in a suburb of Boston that no one outside of my congregation had ever heard of, and have my healthy son. But such were the circumstances of his life, and that's not the lot he drew. And so, putting back together the pieces, not necessarily more beautiful than before, but in an extraordinary way, to tell an extraordinary story, and to live an extraordinary life. He departed the world on Friday, on Erev Shabbat, just yesterday, having given tremendous comfort and strength to so many of us. The double Torah portion that Rachel so beautifully chanted for us today has an intriguing name. It's Acharei Mot-KEDOSHIM. Acharei Mot, after death. Kedoshim, matters of holiness. When we do things very right, when we are very blessed, when we have community to hold us up and help us through, after the crash, there's the possibility of new holiness. There's the possibility of new stories. There's the possibility of blessings which can bring about our own personal and maybe even our communal redemption. For those of us in this community, and there are many who are right now, right in that in-between loss and life, who are living in the dark, I think this double parsha, I think the message of Rabbi Kushner's life can be a beacon of hope. And for all of us, even if we are not currently living in the dark, we know that we will have our turn, because everyone does. To hold in our mind that even when the story goes crash, there's the possibility of a new story ahead. May the memory of Rabbi Kushner be a blessing. It certainly will be. May the memory of Aaron Kushner be a blessing. It already is. May the memory of all of those who we have loved and lost continue to inspire us to write new and better stories ahead. Shabbat Shalom.